Okay, welcome back to the last session before our lunch and guest speaker event. This next session addresses critical infrastructures, defense, and space. Everyone here recognizes the importance of national security and government legitimacy. Our group of world-renowned experts will address these topics and help us understand how AI can play a key role in protecting these sectors. We are proud and honored to have this discussion guided by retired Brigadier General Roberto Mazzolin, Chief Technology Strategist of the Rhea Group, a multinational company providing customized systems and security services for space, military, and government infrastructures. Please welcome Roberto Mazzolin.
Grazie infinitamente per l'introduzione, veramente gentile. Ok. Alors, bonjour à tous. J'aimerais souhaiter mes plus chaleureuses bienvenue ai partecipanti aujourd'hui e particolarmente desidero ringraziare e passare i miei sinceri auguri ai partecipanti italiani che sono venuti qui in Canada eppure partecipano via VTC. I'll be your moderator this morning on the panel discussion considering issues related to critical infrastructures, defense, and space. The security outlook is more perilous than it was a few years ago. We're now facing the twin specter of emboldened terrorists and growing authoritarianism that celebrates the suppression of political and individual freedom as a better way to govern. This ideology is intersecting with geopolitics and driving great power competition as autocratic regimes subvert and challenge the international order and adopt bold risk-taking strategies. We see an approach that seeks to win without fighting, or what has been described as political warfare. The role of non-military means of achieving political and strategic goals has grown and in many cases have exceeded the power of force of weapons and their effectiveness. The expansion of warfare into the novel domains of space and cyber is coupled with an approach to modernization that pursues the exploitation of disruptive information age technologies and allies these to winning operational concepts. It's nothing less than a race for advantage in defining the technologies of the future. More specifically, this incorporates the novel implementation of cyber capabilities and includes artificial intelligence and a variety of emerging disruptive technologies that drive the critical infrastructure and related defense and security systems that support societal resilience that fundamentally underpin government legitimacy. The threat manifests itself in many forms on a daily basis. The collective accumulation of a variety of impacts from a myriad of cyber attacks across the breadth of infrastructure systems and services critical to the security, economic prosperity, and social well-being of the public could threaten our way of life and serve to drain Western innovation, economy, and commerce without reaching the threshold of triggering meaningful government and commercial response. Increasing government and industry investment in cybersecurity highlights the national awakening to this threat as one of the most serious economic and national security challenges. So to that end, this session highlights the challenges that are associated with cybersecurity and artificial intelligence supporting national interests in critical infrastructure, defense, and space, and will consider potential methodologies for protection at scale. To that end, we're blessed this morning to have a tremendous and distinguished panel of speakers. I would like to briefly introduce the players. We have people that represent government at the federal and provincial levels, defense industry, military, as well as the industry sectors in the cyber environment. First, we have Dr. Marthe Kassouf, who's the project manager for the IREQ Cybersecurity Research Project and is an adjunct professor with the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at McGill University. She's worked as a researcher at Hydro-Québec Research Institute since 2008, and her research has been in the areas of telecommunication networks, time synchronization systems, power grid automation, and cybersecurity for smart grids. Welcome this morning, Dr. Kassouf. Next, virtually, we have Dr. Marco Di Clemente, who comes to us from the Technology Office of the Agenzia Spaziale Italiana. He's responsible for the project management and space technologies development in the organization, and he serves as the ASI representative to the European Space Agency Harmonization and Space Component Boards. He also leads the Cosmo second generation program. Next, we have Dr. Andrea Teschioni from Leonardo, and he leads the cybersecurity protection for defense and critical infrastructures for Leonardo. His particular areas of focus are IT, OT convergence platforms, and mass transit systems. His main technical and professional expertise is in the protection of critical infrastructure systems, integrating a broad range of technologies from video surveillance to biometrics. And he has a wide experience in a broad range of cyber-related technologies, including threat intel and cyber situational awareness. Dr. Teschioni, welcome.
Thank you, General.
Benvenuto. Next, we have Ammiraglio Luciano Carosielli, who serves within the Canadian Armed Forces as the Chief of Staff of the Information Management Group. And they're responsible for the provision of strategic information technology and cyber capabilities to the Canadian military and the Department of National Defense. He's a senior naval engineering officer with an exceptional background in maritime engineering and program management, and having recently served as the program manager for the Canadian Surface Combatant Program. Welcome.
Grazie, Roberto.
Next, virtually, we have Dr. Ivan Di Pietro from the National Cybersecurity Agency of Italy, who supports Dr. Baldoni's efforts. He serves as a senior advisor within the agency, and his previous experiences has a broad previous experience in the government of Italy, having served with the Presidenza del Consiglio dei Ministri, eppure as a telematics specialist for the Guardia di Finanza. Benvenuto, Dr. Di Pietro. Next, we have Jason Besner from the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, and he serves as the Director of Partnerships for the CCCS. This group is responsible for managing the strategic engagements with Canadian and international partners to support broad strategic Canadian interests and related mission lines within the CCCS. He has a vast experience, over 20 years of service at CSE, and he's held multiple roles in the signals intelligence environment, as well as liaison and collaboration with other federal government departments. Great to see you again, Jason, and welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Lieutenant Colonel Luc Saint-Jean, who joins us from le Québec Ministère de Cybersecurité et de Numérique, and whose rapidly expanding portfolio is involved in the developing of the vision and cybersecurity strategy for the province of Quebec and its related interests in supporting Mr. Waterhouse's efforts. Luc has a long, distinguished career with the Army Reserve in Canada, having served in numerous operational environments, and his particular expertise is in the area of influence activities, and he serves as an adjunct professor at the Canadian Land Forces Command and Staff College in Kingston. Welcome.
Grazie mille.
So to kick off our session today, what I'd like to do is first introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Yuri Rassega, who will speak to us for the next 15 minutes. We're privileged to have him here today. He serves as the Chief Information Security Officer for Enel, and that's the leading Italian energy services provider, which also has an integrated presence in about 30 countries and 5 continents and serving about 75 million users. He leads all IT, OT, IoT, cybersecurity risk management, governance, engineering, assurance, and operations, including the group CERT and digital identity management services. His previous career roles include serving as CIO, the head of the Global ICT Solutions Center, as well as heading group's ICT global auditing functions and carrying out over 100 deep analyses on global digital assets and processes. He represents Enel on a variety of EU and World Economic Forum working groups, as well as providing contributions to G7 and G20 efforts. He serves as an adjunct professor at a number of leading Italian business schools and is a founding partner of the Italian Engineering and Technology Academy, as well as regularly speaking at many international conferences. Given your experience and background in these interrelated fields, I can't think of a better person to be able to speak on the complex challenges of this dynamic and evolving field. With that, desidero passare il microfono a lei, dottora Rassega. Grazie.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the invitation, this kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and to be allowed to share the experience of my company from the very front line. At Enel, we love to share by nature, but not only, actually, sharing is a fundamental part of our strategy. And I will tell you why in a few minutes. Let's try to move the slides. Okay. You already mentioned some figures about Enel. Just to pick up only a number, 75 million of end users means in terms of people served about 250 million of people, and of course for us is a really great responsibility that we feel. We also are the first network operator, private operator around the world. We are the largest renewable generator player with more than 55% of our capacity fully renewable that was created from scratch in an existing company. So is a giant KPI. We manage more than 1,300 power plants around the world, and not the less important number. We manage 46 million of smart meters. That was also an innovation invented 22 years ago from Enel. Let's go ahead. Our business is, of course, in fast changing phase. Electrification, sustainability, decarbonization are the main forces moving our industry, but the digital is in the middle. With the digital, next slide, with the digital we can manage, run these giant processes, generation, distribution, and also managing the service to our customers. And of course, as you already mentioned in the first part of these meetings, the digital is an imperative, but of course needs to deal with these 6 key trends. You already mentioned the remote working, the digital acceleration of the services during the pandemic and also after the pandemic. The supply chain disruption was during the COVID was mitigated by a digitalization of a lot of services. And for the sustainability, digital can do a lot for our planet. Last but not least, the cybersecurity became crucial. You already mentioned it, so I don't waste time on this. Next slide. Of course, the role of digital, the ICT department changed. We need, and we are in our company in a different model compared to the regular ICT organization. We have an entire division working not as the global ICT function serving the company, while we are managing in our company processes of a digital life from scratch, designed with business every day together, and managed with a best-in-class solution. We leverage a lot on agile, data-driven, and cloud. Next slide. We are working on these initiatives. As you can see, AI, IoT, augmented reality, all these stuffs is something we are using and inventing every day the best way to adopt innovation. We have a division inside our company that works with dozens of innovation hubs, and also in digital, mainly in digital, and also in cyber. We collaborate constantly with this division to collect and try to introduce in our company all the potential benefits from the innovation. Next slide. But there is the cyber threat. Of course, we know that the digitalization brings not only benefit but also exposure to cyber criminals, and not only criminals, of course. Different actors are on the table, and the panel will be more detailed than me discussing about that. Just a message. What we can see is only a small part of the risks, because during the evolution of the cyber threat, we saw not only an increase in number and quality of the attackers, but also the industrialization of this problem. You have people capable to hack that are not the same people that wants to hack. So the people who want to hack someone can buy services. So hacking as a services is something really easy to buy. And this is the problem, because we have a giant multiplier on this as a result. Next slide. On our market, on our industry, we also have another interesting point to underline: the IoT, that is the information technology that manages the primary technologies, the SCADA systems, monitoring system, ICS. This part of the digitalization has a really different priority. As you can see, the availability is the most important objective compared to the IT confidentiality priority. But not only, we have to deal with what I call, please, next slide, original sign. SCADA are usually information technologies that works on primary equipment, primary technologies that last years, decades. And the SCADA systems, of course, are based on computers that needs a more faster update. And in the last decades, we didn't see a perfect alignment from the market on this side. Now we are doing a better job for the future, but we have to run and manage the existing giant brownfield around the world. The next slide, please. Our strategy is security by design based, but driven by risk-based approaches. Next slide. In Enel, we arranged a way to have a risk-based approach driven by business side, and a strong security by design managed by the technical side. But to do this, next slide, we set up an interesting model. On the left, you can see our organizational model based on people. On the right, our process. Next slide, please. I don't want to spend too much time on the organization. I only want to underline that we deal with a central organization, unique organization working around the world with the services you can imagine at the center, the CERT, the engineering, the awareness campaign management, the strategy, the assurance. But we invented a strong connector on the left side with the business, through people that are at double report with the CISO, and also with the managers of each business line. On that side, we manage the risk-based topics. And then on the right side, you can see people working in strong contact with the fabric of the digital. This was a very interesting way to have a unique direction, but leaving the commitment and the accountability pieces by pieces in the right place. How we do this? Please, next slide. Through a model, our security framework that establishes roles, responsibility for all the 8 core processes on cybersecurity. Please, the next slide. As you can see here, we set up this model. Is a strong document. It was signed by the CEO of the group, by the vertex of the group. It is also based on the NIST framework. That, of course, is a giant reference. And next slide. As you can see, we can cover all the value chain of the cybersecurity, starting from the strategy that is driven by the company strategy and also all the requirement on the of the compliant model we have to respect, the objective of the company, the future investment for of the company, and after that we can drive all the following processes that comes on the risk evaluation through the creation of digital stuffs that have a more strong life cycle management. Next slide, please. This is done leveraging on 3 pillars: people, technologies, and processes. Next slide. Today, I want only to share with you some comments on one of these processes, that is the detection and response processes that is managed through the CERT. The CERT is our team that works 24 hours a day in order to detect and manage the response in case of an attack. It was a very interesting experience, because we leveraged on all companies, company actors, to set up this in a shared way, and now we are ready with a major process. Since 6 years, we are doing, next slide, a very interesting activity daily, leveraging on, as you can see, intelligence, machine learning, artificial intelligence. We set up SOAR tools. Next slide. And just to give you some figures, this is a daily workload inside our CERT. We collect information from more than 7,000 data sources around the world. We collect about 3 billion of events a day. We have a strong correlation. That is one of the places in which we use automation to correlate the events and create incidents managed by the automation, the SOAR, and when needed, by real people. Next slide. Of course, what can be managed automatically is done, of course, with automation. But in case of necessity, as you can see, we can switch and trigger processes that is based on people activities, and we set up in any event a specific process, a continuity management in case of a technical accident, a data breach evaluation in case of a potential data breach, and so on. This in a continuous learning cycle, and stay in touch with a lot of stakeholders around the world. We are connected with 8 national CERTs. Of course, the Italian one, represented by Mr. Baldoni, is one of the most important for us. And we share information in real time with a lot of people also from other companies. Next slide. This is a final conclusion slide on the people. We can do a lot with technology, absolutely, but we need to engage people. Usually the first entry point for the attackers are people. We have to work on that. We have a journey that, as you can see, covers all the topics. We continue to inform our working people, and not only the internal one, on this topic. Next slide. And finally, I would like to share with you some emerging trends we can see and we work on. For sure, supply chain. Supply chain is one of the most relevant topic on which we work, and we need to work more in the future, because as we can see, many attacks is moving on the supply chain, because they can through attacking one actor, they can spread with a multiplier. This, of course, needs to be addressed not only with a stupid clause in a contract. We have to create cooperation, a real cooperation, and plan with your supply chain. And not only the pure technological one, because you can be damaged by the absence of a not technical service if is needed for your core business process. Post-quantum cryptography. Quantum, of course, is really interesting, but is a threat for our encryption. We can work together to use the quantum to defend companies. Zero trust, of course. I don't waste time on zero trust because it's a well-known topic at the table. And artificial intelligence, of course, is an important a topic because attackers are investing on the automation. And we, of course, we are doing the same, not only in the CERT, but also with the capability to detect and react automatically also in the network, in the real stuff, in the operational technology. But the attackers are investing. So we have to do the same with decision. Next slide. Finally, we are used to cooperate. As my opening words, for us is a strategy to share everything, share what's happening, what we can do together, and we have to share. We love to share not only with some stakeholders. We cooperate with many partners, of course, the supply chain, authorities, academia, and peers, like the cooperation we have since years with our friends from Québec. There we have Marthe. So this is an example that we have to work with any part, because cyber is not a topic that can be a place in which you compete. You have to cooperate to defend our environment. So this is the biggest place in which we need to cooperate. I stop here, Roberto. I try to stay in the minutes. Just useful reading from the World Economic Forum. We can share this document in detail. So I'm here if you want me to answer some question. I'm totally at your disposition. And thank you for your time. Great pleasure to cooperate with Canadian friends.
No, Yuri, grazie infinitamente. Spero che puoi rimanere con noi per il resto della sessione. Actually, if there was a key point that I'd like to capture from your presentation, in my mind, this serves as a tremendous example of a large-scale multinational organization that's invoking an operating context that's based on a very strong doctrinal basis and envelops pre-event frameworks as a means of confronting systematic attacks against national interests. So that concept will resonate throughout the rest of the panel discussion here, but I'd say that's one of the key takeaway points, and probably serves as an excellent example for international players around the world to emulate. So with that, what I'd like to do is shift over to our panelists, and what I'd like to do in sequence to begin with is if each panelist take a minute or two to be able to actually characterize their role, identify what are the key message, if there's anything that they would like to impart through the panel, and effectively what keeps you up at night, if you will. So if you could, in turn, Dr. Kassouf.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. It's good to see you. You know, we've been working since 2018 with Enel. So what we basically do at the Hydro-Québec Research Institute, we focus on the science of cybersecurity. So we focus on research and development activities that complement what our colleagues in the Hydro-Québec Operational Security Group are doing. So the problem is that we always look at the challenges that we want to address. So we know that threat is evolving. We know, well, we ensure compliance with the standards. We continue to improve our best practices. But the problem for cybersecurity of critical infrastructures, mainly those based on industrial control systems, such as the power grid, is that it's more difficult than classical IT environments. And the reason comes from the increased digitization of operational technology. So all the control systems, the sensors, the actuators, they become more and more interconnected. So meaning that they can be subject to cyber threats. And the consequences of cyber threats against power grids is not that we lose control of a computer or a machine. We are at the risk of inflicting damages on the power grid and significantly impacting the continuity of the electricity distribution system. And again, it's a vital critical infrastructure because think about all the critical infrastructures that depend on electricity. So what we basically do at IREQ is we try to define an approach for the research in the cybersecurity of our control systems and power grids. We also try to identify the best experimental infrastructure that will allow us to simulate cyber attack scenarios against different components of the power grid, conduct deep studies in terms of impact assessment, in terms of designing and implementing advanced monitoring solutions, intrusion detection, attack mitigation, and eventually prevention measures. We do work a lot with many collaborators. We are currently working with 4 universities in Canada. We work with the Communication Security Establishment in Ottawa since 2017. We have lots of industrial partners, so Enel is one of our biggest collaborators on the international level. And we look forward, of course, to defining new collaborations. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. If I could, next, I'd like to turn to Signor Marco Di Clemente. I believe he's connected.
Yes, yes, thanks a lot. Good morning, everyone. And I apologize for not be there, but there are some other issues and activities here in Europe. So as you said in the presentation, I work with the Italian Space Agency. I think it is rather well known. ASI is a government agency established in 1988 with the purpose to regulate and coordinate space activities in Italy. To do this, of course, we cooperate and we organize. There is a continued discussion with our government authority. We cooperate with other institutional bodies like the defense. You mentioned in the introduction Cosmos SkyMed, that is a dual system jointly developed by ASI and Ministry of Defense, and in order to guarantee security, Earth observation for both civilian and defense purposes. The role of ASI as a responsible of the National Aerospace Plan is to ensure that this plan, once that is agreed with the government, is actually carried out. Of course, as has been already mentioned by previous speakers, the interest in space activities is crucial for in terms of to guarantee the security of the assets that we are going to develop, from communication, navigation, Earth observation satellites that are always and more important in our daily life. Let's say for the space industry is becoming is coming to to play a crucial role even in the future, in the next future. And to do this, of course, we need to guarantee that all these assets are secure and securely operated. So coming specifically to my work in ASI as a responsible of the technology unit, of course, my role is also to see a little bit beyond, so to develop the technologies now that will be, regarding the security itself, the technologies that will protect us from the future threats that will come as far as the new technologies will be developed, dealing, for example, artificial intelligence, post-quantum cryptography, quantum computing, and so on. So this is one of the main aspects to be taken into account, dealing with the new technologies to protect space assets.
And thanks for those tremendous insights. It's always a pleasure to come over to ASI at the near Frascati and see the excellent work that you folks are doing. Next, Andrea, Dr. Teschioni.
Yeah. Good morning to everyone. Bonjour à tous. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much for giving me the possibility today to provide you with the industrial view on correlation between cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. I'm dealing with business development activities within the Leonardo Cybersecurity division, looking after the North American market. Maybe you know Leonardo. Leonardo is a worldwide company active in the aerospace, defense, and space sectors, providing integrated solutions for all of those segments of the market. We are one of the leading industrial companies in Italy. We have 4 domestic markets, but we have also different strategic collaboration and partnership all over the world. We have also an important presence here in Canada. We have also, Leonardo has also an important, let's say, segment of the activities related to cybersecurity, for which a specific division has been created some years ago, let's see, 4 years ago, in order to deal specifically with activities related to cybersecurity. So starting from our 25 experience in 25 old experience in security and digitalization, we, as a company that mainly relates to defense activities, we have a comprehensive experience in terms of security and defense. We, Leonardo, created a specific division dealing with cybersecurity. So within cybersecurity, we are providing solutions for digitalization and protection all of components and providing services for that purpose. Some solutions are related starting from our security operations center we deployed all over the world, with also mention to the cyber information superiority system that we have developed. But we also have, as I will repeat later, a good attention on building skills and capabilities related to cybersecurity. This is the reason why recently we have created a Cybersecurity Academy, where we have the purpose, our main purpose is to develop skills in terms of cybersecurity. We have an agreement here in Canada, as it was said before, with the University of Québec or Ottawa in Gatineau. So we are dealing with many activities in terms of cybersecurity, and we are open to collaborate with our possible Canadian partners in the framework.
Thank you very much. Admiral Carosielli.
Thank you, Roberto. So you indicated that I was a Chief of Staff for Information Management Group, and in that role, I'm responsible to the Assistant Deputy Minister of Information Management for all of the communications and IT requirements for the Department of National Defense and the Canadian Armed Forces. But the second hat that I also do wear is as a Cyber Force Commander. And in that role, I'm responsible to the Chief of Defense Staff for the planning and operations of all cyber operations in Canada and abroad, as well as all of the force development in the cyber domain, for both of those roles, it's absolutely imperative that we have the information technology and cyber security tools in this complex environment. As you heard earlier this morning, the Government of Canada's networks get numerous cyber threats and attacks per day. So it's absolutely essential for us to ensure that we've got cybersecurity baked in from inception, that we have our plans to be able to monitor, detect, and respond to any cyber threats or indications of compromises. Trying to figure out what to do when the attack is already ongoing is not a position you want to be in. What I do want, one of the main points from today to take away is cybersecurity is a team sport. We don't do this alone, not even in the Canadian Armed Forces. We work on a daily basis with the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. I told you I'd get that wrong. We say CCCS. In the military, it's all about acronyms. We don't ever spell out the words. And as Mr. Curry said, maybe I'll just stick to Cyber Center, as well as the remainder of the communication security establishments, as well as all of the other government departments, our allies, and most importantly, industry as well. We can't do this alone. We have to be able to take this, advance this together. One of the biggest things and the mental shift that we have to do is we have to move away from need to know to need to share. Data, information, and intelligence is absolutely essential for cybersecurity to work. We can't do this in a vacuum, and we need to be able to be talking to each other. Thank you, Roberto.
Well, thank you very much. Tremendous insights. And next, Signor Ivan Di Pietro. I believe we have you on screen.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. General. Can you hear me? I hope so.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you for having me as a speaker in this panel with such distinguished guests. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this event where our countries share the respective points of view about an ever-evolving context where AI and other disruptive technologies keep adding degrees of complexity to a sector that is already complex by itself. I'm here as a representative of Italy's National Cybersecurity Agency, the ACN, which has been established last year and has been given, I dare say, a quite impressive amount of duties in the field of cybersecurity that were previously scattered among different entities. Fundamentally, we deal with the cyber resilience of ICT infrastructures in Italy, and we collaborate with other administrations that are responsible for cyber defense, cyber investigations, and cyber intelligence. As the Italian Cybersecurity Authority, the agency plays a major role both for the management of security incidents as it runs the national CSIRT and the protection of critical infrastructures through the so-called CVCN, that is the National Center for Assessment and Evaluation. My current role in the agency is head of the certification division, and I work with a team of certification professionals. As our main duty, we apply security evaluation methodologies to ICT assets that are employed on critical infrastructures, mainly. Therefore, I hope that my contribution to this panel will provide you with just a glimpse on the Italian cybersecurity architecture and will foster cooperation between Italy and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. Much appreciated. Next, we'd like to turn to Mr. Besner. Jason, please.
Thank you. So at the CCCS, we've been around for about 4 years now, and we were created to bring together disaggregated missions, the national CERT, the government CERT, and what the communication security establishment did to protect Government of Canada systems under one roof in the communication security establishment. And what we've been trying to do is to take the expertise that we have built as part of the CSE in defending Government of Canada networks for more than 75 years and make that expertise available, relevant, and actionable to critical infrastructure and private organizations and Canadian citizens across the country. So it was a very tall order. My role currently is the Director of Partnerships. And so I look to all of the services that are available at the Cyber Center, informed by the Foreign Intelligence Mission, informed by our defensive aperture, and then take that to our partners internationally, organizations, academia, and critical infrastructure, and try to share that information. As the Rear Admiral said, The team sport couldn't be more important in us developing more expertise to defend those systems and those networks of importance to the Government of Canada than it is today, because we need to receive information in order to better ascertain the threat. We have tons of information available to us, but we absolutely need partnerships in order to better inform our products and services to develop tailored advice, guidance, and services for critical infrastructure sectors. One of the big challenges that we set out to do was to look at services and products based on sectors, and we increased the 10 government critical infrastructure sectors to 16 industry sectors because the unique needs, maturity, risk assessment, and investments in cybersecurity needed to have a tailored approach across those 16 sectors. Over the last 4 years, we've learned that it's further subdivided into 65 subsectors. So it just goes to show that it's a very unique threat that's faced by just about every single sector. If you look at transport as an example, the threats facing, the capabilities available, and the risk decisions and investments for air, marine, transport, aviation are similar in some ways and very different in others. So very challenging mission that we have, and we do this by participating in events like this as often as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. And finally, Luke, please.
Roberto, je vais essayer de répondre. Quand je me couche, je dors bien. Mais avant de me coucher, j'ai 3 questions que je me pose. La première, elle vient de ma fille. Papa, pourquoi tu as lâché le monde des télécommunications pour aller travailler au ministère de la Cybersécurité? Bien, je suis directeur général, puis ma job, c'est de protéger l'information. Ma fille, je vais protéger ton information parce que j'ai protégé ton pays en Afghanistan. Bonne réponse. La deuxième, j'ai un Jeep. Au Québec, on fait des expéditions, ça prend 3-4 heures de route. Mes 2 chums, 2 exécutifs dans les secteurs essentiels. Ils rentrent dans le Jeep. Schluck, ils s'attachent. Fait, ça en va. Hey Luc, on a 4 heures de route à faire. Parle-nous donc de ta nouvelle job dans la cybersécurité. Hey, pourquoi tu t'es attaché? Bien, parce que Luc, c'est dangereux. Si on ne s'attache pas puis on a un accident, si on s'attache, on va survivre si on a un accident. Ah, OK. Donc, toi, tu dis-tu à ton organisation de s'attacher? Oui, on dit, voici les mesures TI que tu dois appliquer. Puis c'est ça que mes directeurs TI font. On a trouvé plein de nouvelles mesures TI. Ah, là, ça, tu t'attaches. Okay. Tu leur dis-tu pourquoi? Ben oui, si on a une attaque cyber, c'est comme si on a un accident. OK? As-tu compris? Qu'est-ce qui te menace? Ben, les cybercriminels. Ouais, OK. Encore. OK. Deuxième question. As-tu parlé à tes employés à cafétéria? Pourquoi tu fais ça? Pourquoi tu fais des mesures de correctrices pour protéger le réseau? Bien, parce qu'on peut se faire attaquer au niveau cyber. OK. Tu es en train de me dire que ton monde ne sait pas pourquoi ils font ça. Ils n'ont pas compris l'approche holistique. Ils n'ont pas compris que le système international est en train de changer. Ils n'ont pas compris qu'il faut qu'on se parle, toutes nous autres. Parce que la menace est organisée. Alors, on va s'organiser en équipe. Hein? Puis comme on dit au hockey, on va aller compter des buts. Et on va gagner. Troisième question. Est-ce que j'ai répondu aux 2 premières questions quand je me couche? Si c'est oui, j'ai une bonne journée qui s'annonce demain matin.
Excellent. Merci pour mes compliments. Merci bien. Votre expérience militaire, c'est bien clair, bien pratique et ciblé. Alors, merci. Alors, the next portion of the session, what I'd like to do is turn to some selected questions, focused at the different sectors, if we will. And it's really, the aim is comparing, contrasting approaches in the respective countries. So the first one I'd like to pose to Dr. Kassouf and Senor Di Clemente, given your involvement in the provisioning of critical infrastructure, both in the terrestrial and the space environment. When we look at much of our public information operational IoT critical infrastructure, it's evolving towards provision by private entities. So governments for critical services are increasingly relying on private entities to provide that. Also, there's increasing emphasis on the use of space infrastructure. Over the next 10 years, we're looking at approximately 25,000 satellites being launched. So this creates a number of supply chain considerations, and also the increased aperture of threat aperture against cybersecurity architectures and evolving towards zero trust frameworks and increasingly leveraging AI. Could you offer some comments and thoughts in terms of how your organizations are dealing with that? Please, if I could start with Dr. Kassouf.
Well, probably I can speak for the Research Institute. You know, like all the operational security questions, I'm not, you know, it's more, it goes more towards the Hydro-Québec Cybersecurity group. But in terms of research, obviously, we start to look at future problems. So the power grid, the way we knew it in the past decades, is kind of being completely transformed with an increasing role for consumers, all those interconnected distributed energy resources, the different IoTs, the smart homes, all the equipment that comes with that. Obviously, it's a major transformation of the power grid. So the more players we have, the more interconnectivity we have, the more cyber threats we should expect. And obviously, in terms of science, we are looking for ways to design future resilient systems that are able to provide a kind of continuous service while also including some embedded defensive measures against threats that may come from consumers all the way up to the supply chain.
Okay, thank you very much. Signor Di Clemente, could you speak to that, particularly in light of the increased emphasis on space-based, reliance on space-based infrastructure? And we've seen some recent examples of that, the impacts, the Starlink satellites that have been launched in support of the Ukraine, and increased hacking on the part of Russian players. But in general terms, could you please expand?
Yeah, exactly. As has been already said, the space sector and the cybersecurity are both evolving quite rapidly. There are disruptive technologies, disruptive capabilities like LEO constellations that are generally constituted by hundreds or even thousands of satellites. There are reconfigurable satellites, critical service security that are driven by space assets. Dealing with space infrastructure and critical infrastructure, I think there are different aspects to be taken into consideration. First, that the previous model where space services were separated from networks on Earth is not more valid. I mean, this model has changed in the last years. The two worlds are becoming more and more interdependent. Therefore, the security of critical infrastructure on Earth will depend more and more from the security of space assets that enable some critical capabilities. Another aspect, as you mentioned, Roberto, you just mentioned, is the fact that there is an increasing number of players in space, not only coming from the private sectors that are attracted, of course, by the so-called space economy with the numbers that everyone has in mind in terms of expected revenue, but there is also a reduction of access costs to space that can enable a multitude of players coming from different nations to have the capability to do access to space. And this is also enhanced by the development of small satellites that, of course, further reduce the cost to go to space. And finally, the new technologies, new capabilities that are going to be developed that makes, of course, these two, the space sector more and more affected by cyber threats that, of course, shall be foreseen. The digitalization that is happening also in the space sector lead to the so-called software-defined satellites. Though the satellite could be in principle reconfigured in space, and that means that can be adjusted in response to changing demand and to respond also to threats that can emerge. What to do with this all in this quite complex, let's say, system and ecosystem? I think we need to more and more to develop critical technologies that can be seen as the protection for the future assets, space assets that we are going to develop, and at the same time the protection of critical infrastructure on Earth that are based and that are enabled by these space assets. For these, of course, there are some technologies as artificial intelligence, but also quantum and post-quantum cryptography, the advantage that will come from quantum computing. Of course, we need to take into consideration that based on this, on what is going now in terms of research and development, from now up to 10 years, probably all the, for example, encrypted methods or algorithms that we use today shall be changed due to these new technologies that we are going to develop. And of course, what is important to understand is that the space asset is something can be seen as a distributed system. So it relies on assets that are in space, clearly, but also on ground infrastructure and communication. And this is also another quite important particular topic that shall be taken into account. So the need to protect the system as an end-to-end system, because of course, the lack of one security measure in one of these three main elements of a space access means to the possibility to lose the complete infrastructures. And this is also a quite peculiar aspect of space.
Thank you. I mean, really speaking to the expansion of the of network architectures into another domain of environment, when we start looking at the dependency on terrestrial-based critical infrastructure and space-based assets related to position navigation and timing, Earth observation, and in addition to telecommunications and the breadth of services that they support and their interrelationship to critical infrastructures, it really forces us to start look at new architectural principles and also vulnerabilities that are particular to that environment. What I'd like to do, the next question, I'd like to focus this towards Admiral Carosielli and Signor Teschioni. When we look at the center of gravity and geopolitical influence in supporting military operations that have shifted away from the concentration of conventional forces to information systems, and this involves a system of systems confrontation, which creates new operating concepts such as cross-domain, autonomous swarms, and precision attack to achieve persistent paralysis of governments. So in the context of trying to marshal national capacity, when you're looking at defense support and the industry-based support to national interests, what sort of models would you see for potential government and industry collaboration? I mean, this is, again, it's an issue of how do we effectively marshal national capacity in its entirety. And, you know, and I'm sure you're aware of, for example, on one extreme, you know, the Chinese national security intelligence laws that compel national industries to support government interests and objectives. Not that we have to go that extreme, but are there models that you would say in our current reality that would apply? Perhaps if I could start with Admiral Carosielli.
Thanks, Roberto. As you indicated or alluded to in your introduction, historically, we had seen that air superiority is what you needed to take advantage on a battlefield. But what we are seeing come to true right now is that cyber is now a warfare domain, just like land, sea, air, or space is. And reality, if you don't have cyber space and air superiority, you're not going to be able to have advantage in the battle space. So to be able to get there, though, we need to ensure that we have that work done ahead of time. The way I like to explain this is you can't turn cybersecurity on when the attack is already happened. I use the example, would you like me to start buying the missiles the day the war starts? Because by then, it's too late. You have no missiles on your planes, takes you 2 years to buy them, not very good. So for cybersecurity, we need to ensure that we've actually been working with all of our partners, either within government and industry, to ensure that we have the access to the networks so that when we do need to go, we're ready and we could actually be effective on day number one. Starting to, as we say in the military, boot up and get spurred, when the attack is on, is too late. You're playing catch up. So it's important to be able to share information, and I alluded that in my introductory, right? It is sharing of information. There is a lots of classified information. Typically, the way we collect the data is classified. The actual information itself is not all that classified, because if you know where to go look for it on the web or the dark web, you're going to be able to find it. So it's important that we share those intelligence reports as widely as I can amongst the government departments and our industrial partners. It's very important to be working with industry, as you have many keys to those domains. You know, the AWSs, the Microsoft, the Googles, as well as the critical infrastructure. You have access that threat vectors want to get access to, so we have to work together to be able to defend it.
Great. Again, emphasizing an earlier point that was made one of the previous panels of cybersecurity is a team sport. Sharing is required.
Yeah.
Signora Teschioni.
Yeah, I totally agree with my colleagues. Carezali was saying we are now facing a lot of attacks and threats provided by made by terrorist organization, criminal organization, and critical infrastructures are the most attacked components ones. So we face we see attacks towards energy plants, towards telecommunication networks, and in this framework, as an industry, we see that the point is that technologies alone are not enough. A cooperation framework which has to be, let's say, designed between industries, research institutes, university, but also governmental organizations has to be designed. We as industries or research institutes can play our role. For example, we can try to, let's say, to design and to implement, to supply the best components in terms of cybersecurity technology. But for example, if governmental organizations do not provide the right framework in terms of cooperation between the different, let's say, entities, we cannot, let's say, win the war. Within Leonardo, for example, we have 3 examples of cooperation between our company and the research institute and the university. For example, starting from our threat intelligence and cyber information superiority model that we are that is operating in our security operations center, as my colleague was saying before, we are trying to share every information that we kept, that we are finding within our security operations center with governmental organizations in order to make them prepared before that the real attack is coming. So once we have an information at the threat intelligence level, we immediately cooperate, and we have a specific framework to do this with governmental organization in order to cooperate against the possible attacks. The second one is a Cybersecurity Academy I was mentioning. We are cooperating with university and the research institutions in order to develop cyber skills, to let's say, to make people aware about cyber risk and as much as possible. But third example that I wish also to underline, at the corporate level, not actually within the cybersecurity division, but at the corporate level, we have implemented some Leonardo labs, what we call Leonardo labs, that is a direct cooperation with the universities, where we are hardly working also in cybersecurity. For example, the Leonardo labs, they are developing a very interesting malware detection and classification algorithm using computer vision technologies. So they translate malware information in images, and they open classical pattern recognition models in order to improve the classification functionalities about malware. So again, let me repeat that as a technology provider, we are not alone. Cooperation with other players operating in the same cybersecurity world are necessary.
So effectively combining the respective strengths and capabilities, one in the industry base to be able to provide the operational capabilities that support national level requirements.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. What I'd like to do, the next question, I would like to turn to our national and provincial agency partners. When we look at, right now, we see Europe taking some initial steps towards the establishment of common threat intelligence sharing, cyber situational awareness, and common response scenarios. How do we begin framing such a protocol on an international scale? I mean, the context is that a rapid response requires a formal pre-event framework for the active management and response to hostile state-based and criminal actors in the threat environment. What elements do you feel are key to such a protocol? Perhaps if I can start with Signor Di Pietro.
Yes, thank you. Well, the Italian approach to the security of supply chain and in general critical infrastructure is focused on what we call the national security perimeter for cyber. Simply put, the perimeter is a set of companies and public entities that run critical services, as well as the ICT assets they use in their respective critical infrastructure. So according to secondary legislation, specific categories of these assets are subject to security evaluations before being deployed. And of course, these categories include industrial control systems, 5G networks, network assets, etc. And technical scrutiny is performed by the National Center for Assessment and Evaluation, which is established within my agency. And the center may perform security tests both on software and hardware components. And the center does this using its own personnel and facilities or through the support of external accredited labs that are only Italian in this context. But of course, Italy adheres to a set of mutual recognition agreements in terms of cybersecurity certification. I would cite, for example, the CCRA, where both Italy and Canada are authorizing members. So this is to stress how important it can be in this field, the use of common methodologies for certification of products. And of course, at least in Europe, we have the framework of European certification system that play a major role, or even because my agency is the National Cybersecurity Certification Authority. So this is another form of international cooperation in this field, even though it is just for European state members. Just to share a best practice, I would cite another legislation that we have in Italy that allows us to evaluate ICT assets not only from a technical perspective. Indeed, we have another legislative tool that is called the Golden Power Law. It has been enforced for a decade as a form of monitoring of foreign direct investments in sectors such as defense, national security, and a growing list of other critical sectors based on European regulation that include also AI-powered systems and other disruptive technologies. The evaluation of golden power notification is assigned to an interministerial coordination group, and my agency is part of it together with other administrations that have the competence and the information needed to evaluate the trustworthiness of vendors, also considering geopolitical aspects. So in this sense, it is important to share information in order to evaluate even on a from a strategic point of view, the security of the supply chain. So not only the technical scrutiny on ICT assets themselves, but also a more strategic evaluation on the trustworthiness of vendors. And according to the latest version of the Golden Power Law, I would like to focus on the sector of telecommunication, because mobile network operators in Italy must now notify annual development plans for their 5G networks, with evidence of components provided by both European and non-European vendors. And by applying the Golden Powers, the plan can be approved with or without prescriptions, or it can be rejected. And in this sense, typical prescriptions refer to security measures that we take typically from European guidelines, such as the 5G toolbox that is a sort of best practice of a set of security measures that can be applied, of course, within Europe, but also can be applied also abroad. And as regards the role of AI, just a little consideration, because in one of the previous sessions, for example, we were wondering whether it is a friend or a foe to cybersecurity. We all like to think of it as a facilitator, and indeed it often is a facilitator. However, when it comes to its integration in complex architectures like telecommunication, for example, think about 5G core networks, AI adds layers and layers of complexity. Just consider operational support system or management and network orchestration platforms that must dynamically change the configuration of networks in order to cope with the strict performance requirements and enable computational models such as network slicing that 5G networks are supposed to implement. Obviously, the traditional security evaluation model that is based on product certification schemes don't fit anymore to such a scenario, where products and systems are continuously changing according to the decisions made by an algorithm. So we will need to review our certification schemes. We should move on from a product-oriented point of view to new perspectives that look at processes, algorithms, and the quality of data sets. European regulation initiatives are already in progress, but a broader international cooperation of like-minded countries is very important to this end, in my opinion. Thank you.
Speaking to the concept of an evolving nature of a relationship that's becoming developing into a doctrinal approach then. No, thank you. Thank you for that. Jason.
So building off what Mr. De Pietro finished with is a collaboration between like-minded nations. I think that's a very important concept, because we're already members in a lot of international communities that don't necessarily focus on cybersecurity, but we are like-minded in a rules-based international order that could easily be applied to cyber. In this space, you mentioned threat information sharing and what can be done in terms of a model that could be developed. The first thing is declassifying as much as you can. That's already been talked about today. At CSC, we have a threat feed that we make available to organizations for free, that we populate with declassified information from our foreign intelligence mission and a number of other sources that feed it, and it's updated daily. So we have that's available. We have a number of other vulnerability identification feeds that are available to organizations. In terms of the international cooperation right now, it's largely focused, from what I see in the incident management space, on cert-to-cert relationships, the International Watch and Warning Network, first example. And there's very good collaboration whenever we need to work from one country to another, so point-to-point sharing of information in order to take action. But it's not necessarily transferring information on TTPs. to get above the deterministic indicators that we're working on every day, and to start looking at techniques, tactics, and procedures would be an ambitious goal. Each of us have our own regulatory frameworks. That shouldn't be an impediment. It should just be a reality that is recognized in terms of providing best advice and guidance according to best practices. In Canada right now, largely it's very voluntary. We work with some lead federal departments which act as regulators for some of our critical infrastructure, and upon request will provide expertise in cybersecurity. But most of our partnerships, we provide very detailed expertise on advice and guidance, and most choose to adopt them, not because they're compelled to, but because they choose to. It's not the same across our nations when we look at the international community, but that shouldn't change the ambitious goal of having a best standard set of practices, regardless of how it's implemented.
Oh, thank you, Jason.
Au niveau provincial, le MCN veut se rapprocher des municipalités parce que ce sont des protecteurs et aussi des exécutants des infrastructures essentielles. Il faut qu'on se rapproche aussi de la communauté des affaires parce que vous aussi, vous avez un rôle important là-dedans. Il faut qu'on se rapproche de la société civile et ce qui la compose. Il faut qu'on se rapproche des OBNL, il faut qu'on se rapproche de tout cet écosystème-là. Alors, pour ça, on doit détecter, on doit comprendre qu'est-ce qui se passe, comme je vous ai mentionné, c'est de détecter et de comprendre la menace. Mais se la garder et répéter qu'est-ce qui nous menace, nous, au Québec. Parce qu'on a un savoir-faire intéressant au Québec. On fait des choses intéressantes au Québec. On a des gens d'affaires et vous êtes ici, vous créez quelque chose d'importance, il faut s'assurer de protéger ça. Et de remonter ça avec nos partenaires fédéraux. Travailler en équipe. Voici ce que je vis. Et lui va me dire, Luc, voici ce qu'on est en train de rechercher sur le plan international. Voici les meilleures pratiques. Va voir ça, va voir ça. Et j'ai l'équipe d'encadrement qui, quand j'ai commencé à leur parler de ça, on va commencer à regarder ce qui se fait au niveau international. La contribution, elle va être poussée par en haut au fédéral, qui, eux, vont pouvoir dire, hey, au Québec, ils font des choses intéressantes. Voici ce qu'ils font. Ça vous tente-tu de vous parler? Ils vont nous aider à partager des choses avec d'autres nations. Et nous, en contrepartie, il faut être ouvert, puis il faut avoir des gens qui font cette recherche-là et cette compréhension-là. Et la preuve, bien, c'est que je suis allé chercher des stagiaires qui vont rentrer travailler avec nous au niveau du renseignement, okay, puis au niveau de l'encadrement gouvernemental. Pourquoi? Parce que des jeunes universitaires, ils ont le savoir, ils sont dans l'action. Ils vont aller fouiller, ils vont nous aider, ils vont trouver des choses dans les meilleures pratiques à l'international. Donc, ils vont pouvoir nous aider là-dedans. Puis c'est des jeunes, ça les touche. C'est eux qui ont le futur. Et moi, je vais remonter ça en haut. Et puis là, ben, peut-être qu'on aura des opportunités de faire d'autres rencontres et de partager où on est rendu dans notre réflexion. Chose intéressante, c'est que je suis agréablement surpris de voir qu'au ministère de la Cybersécurité, on est actif. On n'est pas passif. On est actif, on est agile. Et la preuve, c'est que quand j'ai proposé l'approche pour faire du renseignement et que je veux partager ce renseignement-là avec la société civile, bien, j'ai eu cette ouverture d'esprit-là. Alors, il y a beaucoup de choses en chantier, puis vous allez voir que les annonces qui s'en viennent très bientôt vont corroborer ce que je vous dis ici. Malheureusement, je ne peux pas vous dire ce que je vois encore dans la balle de cristal, mais l'année prochaine, vous allez être surpris de voir tout ce qu'on a réalisé dans un an.
Yeah, really, again, once again, emphasizing a developmental approach, and they really I like the point that you make about leveraging the youth and growing this capacity within the country. No, excellent. I'd like to turn back to Dr. Kassouf and Signora Di Clemente. And again, when we look at the protection of critical infrastructure at the enterprise level, and now we start seeing that these frameworks are beginning to evolve, I mean, in practical terms, are there any steps that you would recommend that C-level executives responsible for large critical infrastructure that they need to take to posture their organizations for better protection? Are there any recommended priorities or checklists that you'd recommend? Dr. Kassouf.
recommendations coming from the
Oh, is it on?
Okay, so now it's working. Okay, so in addition to the existing mechanism at a company like Hydro-Québec, so we do have obviously rules and guidelines set out by our cybersecurity group. What we're trying to do at the research level is to try to identify new elements that can influence the decision-making process at the high level, taking into account the operational constraints of the field devices. And it's very important if what we hope for becomes real. It means that the existing mechanism for any strategic level decisions when it comes to the cybersecurity of the power grid operations, they will be complemented by metrics, security metrics coming from operational devices. And we consider this as a new layer of security that comes under the umbrella of IT/OT conversions, something that we have to take into account when it comes to ICS cybersecurity.
Thank you. Signor Di Clemente, and this question probably has particular relevance in light of the earlier comments and increasing emphasis on space-based infrastructure, which C-level executives, CISOs, CIOs, and new organizations are having to deal with. Your thoughts?
Yes, what is important, I think, is to define, due to the increasing of threats and players that are acting in space, there is a need to define new standards in space system engineering. Cyber security shall become more and more as a part of the engineering process and the development process in order to realize systems that are secured by design and not. This is, of course, shall be taken into account since the early stage of a development of a new asset. And as I said, since the space asset can be seen as a distributed system, there is a need to understand that the need to protect shall be taken into account from as an end-to-end approach. So dealing with the ground infrastructures for ground segments protection, that is pretty similar to the protection of any other critical infrastructure on Earth. The protection of the signals, of the telecommunication from the ground station to the satellite, and the protection of the satellites itself. The cyber threats, cyber attacks can, of course, intervene at different level, can be seen as can steal data, can jam a satellite signal, can hack a satellite in orbit due to new capabilities dealing with in-orbit servicing, can, of course, grab a satellite and use it as a spy. So there are so many possible configuration and possible threats that should be taken into account, that is important to have a clear development and process associated to this kind of events that can happen and will happen in the future.
Really looking at adapting a specialized standardization environment for the space environment, given its increasing reliance on IP-based technologies, the transition from what was at once bespoke technologies in that environment. Next question, I'd like this again to Admiral Carozielli and Signor Teschioni. This relates more to artificial intelligence, the support of contemporary military operations, or the evolution towards autonomous weapon systems. So a lot of these systems increasingly rely on the integration of 5G, IoT, and increasingly enabled by AI. And when we start looking at, industrial application of AI in support of autonomous weapon systems, a big part of this really depends on what ethics are you programming into this. So what steps would you look at taking in terms of protecting, ensuring the human in the loop, if you will, to ensure ethical, moral integrity in the application of weapon systems, if you will?
Grazie, Roberto. So that is a great question. And just to start off with, many people think that, you know, the innovation in artificial intelligence is something new. This is just coming to us. Where in reality, in the defense industry, we've been using these for a while already. Just as early as fuzzy logic in the radars of the 1970s. And currently, we're using AI to predict the maintenance of some of our naval fleets. So some of that early on is already there. We're wrapping our minds around it. But your question really goes to the use of force, right? When you're using artificial intelligence to go out and provide a kinetic effect. And currently, we've always had, as you indicated, man in the loop or person in the loop. Let's bring it up to the 21st century statement. So person in the loop where even our current frigates can defend themselves 100%. We could put that system in full auto. It will detect, track, and engage a threat. Currently, it is a human being that presses the little red button that has the word fire on it, right? And the reason for that is they're saying we only trust a human being to make the decision to take another life. Now, with the introduction of AI, the speed of information, the amount of information that's coming at people, and the biases that human beings have, do we still think of person in the loop, or is it now person on the loop? Slight difference there, whereas a person doesn't necessarily have to have their finger on the fire button, or their finger is more on the veto button. And the veto button for us is something that stops something from happening, vice something that makes something happen. So AI is a field that we are definitely looking at, and the ethics about it is the balance between the ethics and the efficacy of what you're going to be able to do. And that is what we have a lot of people looking and working at, and how do we ensure that we still have the accountability and the responsibility, because something goes wrong, you can't really bring the computer to court, right? They're not going to stand trial. So it has to be a human being, but how do you do that in that responsibility and accountability train? How are the logs being tracked? So can you do an investigation and determine what went wrong and who do you hold accountable? And that is all that we have to get right before we let the computer do the last bit for us. So a lot of work is still to be done there. We haven't not cracked that nut yet, but the data innovation and analytics section of the Canadian Armed Forces is one of the main things they're working on.
So it really speaks to the requirement for future generations of operational commanders to understand the essence of the technology. And it's no longer something that's held back in the back rooms of the technical community.
Affirmative.
Senior Teschioni.
Yeah. Complexity in defense operational theaters is very huge because of the very heterogeneous amount of data, especially in terms when we spoke about in the defense operational theaters, we spoke about autonomous weapons or autonomous vehicles. This is even more important because falling or having success or falling in a mission can imply risk for lives. So in these terms, since as Leonardo, we developed the C4I system since many years, applied in different operational theaters, Army, Navy, Air. So we have a huge experience. But since our last C4I, different information and new information has become. For example, as you were saying within your question, IoT information, 5G telecommunication networks. And this is a set of new information which is now available and which can be used to improve the performances for putting the medal, improving the performances of the men in the middle within defense operational theaters. With this purpose, we are now moving forward for a C4I system where the use of artificial intelligence is already intense, to a C5I, where the fourth C is cyber. So we are trying to insert cyber information coming from a threat intelligence system starting from a cyber by design approach within our operational control rooms, in order to use the contribution coming from cybersecurity to improve the operational capabilities of autonomous X weapons or vehicles or something else in so challenging operational theaters. We are in a good position on that, and we saw that the use of cyber within and the use of AI within a command and control room do represent a very important contribution in improving performances. In order to let's put really man in the middle in such context.
Well, thank you for that. I'd like to squeeze one more question into our agency partners, if I may. Given that geopolitical competition plays out in the cyber and the space critical infrastructure, there's a need to develop an international cybersecurity regime for the establishment of norms. Now, what principles and what form would you see for such a protocol? Maybe you briefly could highlight key principles. If I could start with Signor Di Pietro. And then we're running up against the lunch here, so if we could just really highlight the key points. I wanted to get that question in.
Yeah, it's a complex topic because you have to deal with the trustworthiness of vendors across the world, across our globalized world. So the principles are that of, first of all, transparency and the security of the supply chain. The more your vendor is transparent, the more you can check how it produces the assets you are going to use on your critical infrastructure. In this context, another important factor is that of certification. We can use certification to assess the security of several assets, but we have to monitor and participate as a government in the standardization bodies in order to represent our common like-minded interests and get those interests projected into the standard we use during certification of products or processes.
Jason.
It's a big question for a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit about our concept of threat surface. And when we talk about the supply chain that we have now, we talk about the threat surface as the potential vulnerabilities that you have in your systems and networks. And that's whether you connect an IoT device to it, whether you're actually looking at your supply chain and the security that they implement within their devices, looking at security by design, looking at the importance and the risk assessment for where you place equipment in your network. This is the message that we've been projecting and we've been highlighting in our national threat assessments. And I'm really hoping that as we move towards international norms and standards, it will be buoyed by consumer demand. That consumers are going to be demanding more transparency, they're going to be demanding more security by design, and that's going to force the industry to achieve a higher bar rather than aiming for the minimum standard if it were enforced upon them.
Thank you. Luke.
Il faut partager ce qu'on trouve. C'est simple, il faut partager ce qu'on trouve. Puis, le partage, c'est que je vais vous donner un exemple. Le centre de cyberdéfense, quand il trouve des éléments de vulnérabilité avec les logiciels utilisés, bien, tout de suite, il y a des téléphones qui se font directement aux vendeurs, directement aux entreprises qui nous fournissent ces éléments-là. Et oui, on remonte ça aussi avec nos partenaires. Ça se fait déjà. Pour partager, et il faut que l'ascenseur revienne. C'est une loupe, hein? Il faut qu'on travaille en équipe. C'est toujours les mêmes thèmes qu'on aborde, c'est toujours les mêmes choses qu'on martèle. Quand on trouve quelque chose, on ne peut pas rester tout seul. Il faut qu'on le partage. Il faut qu'on le partage à tout le monde, puis il faut qu'on le partage entre nous. Ce n'est pas une question de réputation, c'est une question de si on ne le partage pas, on augmente nos risques collectifs. C'est un peu l'approche qu'on a au ministère.
Thank you very much. So with that, what I'd like to do is take this opportunity to thank the panel for the tremendous insights you've provided. If I could, one very last question, and I'll just open it up to the floor, just for if anybody really wished to. If there was one thing to reinforce bilateral Canada-Italy relationships or practical action we could undertake, what would it be? And I just open this up if anybody has some strong feelings in terms of recommendations.
So you used the word practicalize them, so just wanted to highlight that a lot of that already happened. So my team and I have opportunities to meet our counterparts at NATO and bilateral forums routinely, and those are perfect opportunities to be able to share information, share lessons learned, and that builds the relationships for us to respond, as what we say, at the speed of relevance. If you know who you're speaking to, you're quicker to pick up that phone, you're quicker to respond. So it's invaluable to build those relationships every opportunity you get.
Super, thank you. Other comments, anything from the screen? I think we're, I think that it's a great encapsulation and certainly sets the tone for the whole panel. Look, I'd like to thank you very much for your indulgence. I know we've reached into your lunchtime for a bit, but I'm sure you'll share my opinion that given that we have such a distinguished panel here today, that we would have been remiss to be able to fully benefit from the fruits of their experience. So with that, please join me in thanking our panelists both here and on screen for it. Grazie, buon proseguimento.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Mazzolin and members of the panel. This concludes the plenary session for today. For those of us in Montreal, we will now move to the next room for the luncheon. In case you're wondering what table you're at, it's on the flip side of your name tags. Important information, where we will be joined by the Quebec Minister for Cybersecurity, Eric Kerr, and the keynote speech will also be available for us joining us virtually in a few minutes on the same channel. Just a last reminder, the second day of our conference will start tomorrow at 8:30 Canadian time, Standard Time, and 2:30 Central European Time. Thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.